Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Vintage Motocross Radio. I'm your host, Joe Abadi. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, please share the show with some friends. Tell them to come over. We're going to have an interesting guest with us in just a couple of minutes. It'll be Russell Waters, our Amsoil representative, and of course, a sponsor of our show. Before we begin today, sad news out of Sweden on Saturday. Bengt Aberg has passed on. He was one of the top riders in motocross Grand Prix World Championships during the late 1960s and early 70s. In 1968, he was part of the Swedish team that won the Trophy to Nations. He won the FIM 500cc Motocross World Championship in 1969 and 1970 while riding for Husqvarna Factory Racing Team. Aberg was a member of three victorious Swedish teams at the Motocross to Nations in 1970, 71, and in 1974. In 74, 75, and 76, he rode for the Bultaco factory in the 500cc class. In 77, he competed on a highly modified four-stroke Yamaha XT500 built in collaboration with former world motocross champions Torsten Hallman and Sten Lundin. Aberg rode the bike to a victory in the first moto of the 1977 500cc Luxembourg Grand Prix and ended the season ranked ninth in the final World Championship standings. Aberg was just 76 years old. It's 11 o'clock in Burbank, 2 o'clock in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Good morning. And once again, this is Joe Abadi. You're listening to Vintage Motocross Radio. Whether you're listening from your phone or your computer, please share the show on Facebook or YouTube. This program is made possible with the help of our sponsors, Northwest Mako CZ. For all your Mako and CZ parts, please contact Alan Brown. Preston Petty Products, the legend continues. Amsoil, the first in synthetic oil since 1973. Full Circle Racing for rims, spokes, lacing, and truing. For both vintage and modern bikes, be sure to contact Full Circle Racing. Vinco, keep the ride going with over 650 products in their catalog. Motion Pro, for all your specialized tools, cables, and controls. And I'd like to welcome our new sponsor, Sunrise Vapor Blasting. Thank you, Mark Farrister. For more information on Sunrise Vapor Blasting, please see their page on Facebook. Be sure to visit all of our sponsors on Facebook and, of course, all forms of social media. My guest this morning is a longtime dirt bike enthusiast who got most of his riding experience in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. We'll be talking more about that in just a minute. Throughout his career, he worked for Pennzoil, Shell, and most recently, Amsoil products. Today, we'll be talking mostly about his time at Amsoil, how he began there, and how that company has evolved into all forms of motorsports racing. It's my pleasure to have as my guest this morning, Mr. Russell Waters. Russell, are you with me?
Hey, Joe, glad to be here.
It's wonderful to have you here, Russell.
Awesome. I'm glad your listeners are here.
Yeah, we'll have. I'm sure we'll have a good crowd here. The usual people who just come in, and if you're just getting here, also, if you want to comment, you can sign in or just agree to the StreamYard agreement. You just click the link, and I'll be able to see your name when you make a comment or ask a question. If you don't do that, I won't be able to see your name, but I still will be able to see your questions. Now, Russell,
Yes.
before we begin talking about Amsoil, I'd like my listeners to know a little bit more about your time with Pennzoil and Shell and the experiences you had with those companies. Talk about that a little bit for us, will you?
Okay, sure. Yeah. So back in 1976, early 75, I lived in Pensacola, Florida, and I decided to go to college, of course, like many people do back in those days.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Pensacola Junior College and ended up getting my business administration degree. Then from there, I went transferred over to the University of West Florida. Back then, that college was only a two-year college, a junior-senior college.
Okay.
So then I got my marketing and management degree. I know it sounds impressive, but it's really not because there's only two different classes you got to take, a salesman class and a marketing class. So I decided to take both, and I got a dual degree. Which all that behind me, I then landed a job as an assistant buyer, buying bulk oil and with the Shell distribution center and allocations with Shell. So Shell also owns Pennzoil in Quaker State, so I got to learn all the bulk oil and oil distributions for the company, and got to manage those various Shell locations and quotas and forecasting and management with that new degree I just got. So I thought I was kind of like high on the hog back then. So
Okay.
then I got assigned to the Jiffy Lube Corporation, Jiffy Lube International. So I got to oversee all the Jiffy Lube franchising operations in the United States and their allocations, and I got to do all their quotas and things like that. And then my boss one day, Brian, took a liking to me and said, Russ, if you want to go further with this company, you're going to have to get you a fuel and lubrication and training degree. So I was like, what? Really? You think so? He's like, yeah, you need to get some more experience and education. So I think what you need to do is get your engineering degree. And I was like, well, I've already, been to college and all that stuff. He's, well, without a petroleum engineering degree, you're not going to go very far with the company. So he said, we got a program for employees that work for us, and I'm going to put you in for a scholarship. And I was like, okay, I guess that sounds okay. So anyway, he put me in for the scholarship. I got accepted, and they gave me a full scholarship to get my undergraduate degree in petroleum engineering.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't just a matter of you being a salesman out on the road and telling everybody this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. You actually got an education and you really knew what you were talking about from the bottom up.
Yeah. So I got a petroleum engineering degree. I mean, it oversees activities related to production of the hydrocarbons and, crude oil and natural gas. And anyway, that's petroleum engineering. There's several different petroleum engineering degrees you can get. Mine was more of a production engineer specialist.
Okay.
I know it sounds like a fancy title, but all my stuff was more practical than theory. I actually got hands-on stuff, so it was kind of cool back then because it was kind of entry level to engineering, and it paid really good money back in those days too. So I guess you can call it a branch of engineering that makes the world reliable and sustainable energy. It's kind of cool. It's a cool role to have.
It certainly sounds like it, Russell. And I just wanted the listeners to know a little bit more about your background and your education as far as oil goes and the different companies you worked for. Now, in the introduction, I did mention that you learned to ride a dirt bike in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. What were you doing in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba? When was that? And how did that all happen?
That's kind of funny. So my dad was in the Navy for 26 years. I also went in the Navy later on. I can talk about that later. But so we lived in Hawaii. That was in 1969. Then we got transferred to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. My dad got assigned to Fleet Training Group. So his forte, he's still alive today. He's 89. He says that he rode every ship in the Navy 3 times and trained them in combat scenarios. So he worked for Fleet Training Group down there, and I went to high school down there from 1970 all the way through 1975. And I got to learn how to ride motorcycles on one of the best places I guess you could imagine. I rode on tank trails and backwoods and got a lot of experience over those years, perfecting, I guess, my racing skills because I learned a lot back in those days. I started on a Z50 like many people do, and then jumped up to a Trail 70. Then I got the racing bug and started racing a SL70, and then a XL75. Then I moved up to SL100. And then I finally moved to the big time. I thought I got me a Montesa 125 Capra.
And this is in Cuba. You're riding a Montesa in Cuba.
Yes.
Did they have motocross races there, Russell?
Oh yeah. We have motocross races every weekend there. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I raced a lot of good bikes, CZs, Pantons, Kawasaki's, Yamahas. I mean, Suzuki's. Everybody had a lot of dirt bikes down there. I actually flew to Jacksonville, Florida, and flew mine in on a Navy plane, which is kind of interesting. So then the Elsinore came out and kind of blew everything away. So I ended up having to buy me a Elsinore 125 just to keep up with everybody because
that was the thing to have.
Yeah, European bikes just they're heavier and didn't have the zip, and the Elsinore was so much lighter, and I started really winning on that even more. So. And then I liked it so much, I bought me an MT250 to ride on the streets there.
Okay.
And then, I got a Bell Taco 76, 1976 Bell Taco 350, model 188. And then I got me a Husky 1980 CR360. And then I moved up to a Mako 1981 490 Mega, which is, the cream of the crop, they say. And I just bought recently a 1973 Elsinore 250 CR to restore. So, we'll see how that goes.
Okay. So you've got all this experience with dirt bikes and oil throughout most of your life. And I want to move on now to your time with Amsoil. You're such a great sponsor of both of our shows. Now, yes. was Amsoil really the first to make synthetic oil in 1973? And And who started that company?
Well, it actually started in '72, Joe.
Okay.
I actually, back in the day, I hate to say this, so I used Castrol R when I was racing on my Elsinore and my Montesa back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And then I discovered Amsoil just by chance. I was in Jacksonville, Florida, and I went to Barney's motorcycle shop. They were selling Amsoil, and I picked up some and brought it back with me and started using it. So that was in 1973. I switched over to Amsoil, and I haven't changed since then. So I've been using it all these years. So, but to answer your question, yeah, Amsoil was the first one to come out with synthetic oil in 1972. They were the first one actually to pass the American Petroleum Institute requirements too back in those days. And they were the only oil with drain intervals past 3,000 miles. That was in 1972.
So Russell, tell me this, for people that don't know, and also, you know, for my own education as well, although I've read a lot about it, what exactly is synthetic oil? How is it different from conventional oil? Is it manufactured? What makes a synthetic oil synthetic? What is that?
That's a deep question. Yes, it's a long one too. But I think everybody knows synthetic oils really outperform conventional oils today.
Mm-hmm.
But you might not understand why. So the difference begins at the molecular level. I mean, a molecule of synthetic oil is perfectly round. It's made in a laboratory. So if you can describe it, if you look under a microscope at a molecule for synthetic oil, it looks like a marble. It's perfectly round. And if you look at a conventional oil molecule, it looks like a piece of popcorn. It's, you know, rough edges. It's not perfectly round, and it leaves spots if they come together. There's holes in between them. So synthetics aren't really built. They're like synthetic. I mean, conventional oil is distilled, and it still has contaminants in it. They don't get all the contaminants out of oil. Conventional oil, that is.
Okay.
So Amsoil had perfected no contaminants in the oil. So it solves a lot of problems. There's no contaminants in it, that sort of thing.
No, I understand that cars and trucks, and of course we're a motorcycle crowd here, but everybody here probably has, you know, a car or a truck, I'm sure. I understand that vehicles will actually run cooler on Amsoil synthetic oil. How is that possible?
Well, the engine works less hard. That's one reason.
Okay.
It'll run anywhere between 15 to 20% cooler, and that's no joke. I mean, I see it every day in my vehicles. I've got several vehicles that I run, and the needle used to be right up down the middle, and it had oil in it, and it dropped down almost 20% at the temperature gauge. So it makes a big difference.
And it will run that much cooler because it's all running that much smoother. Now, is there a difference also? If you just run it in your engine, that's one thing. What if you go the extra mile and put it in your transmission or the differential? Does it?
Well, the same thing happens. So you save about 2 miles per gallon if you put it in your engine. If you put it in your transmission, you'll save another 1 mile per gallon. If you put it in your differential fluid, that's another 1 mile per gallon savings you'll have.
Okay.
I always say you could probably save yourself easily 4 miles per gallon, if not more.
Let's move on, or move back rather, Russell, to the motorcycle questions, because that's what most of our listeners are here for. And Roy Vanderveer, friend of mine from back east, would like to know what do you think the biggest mistake people make when they buy a new two-stroke motorcycle when it pertains to mixing ratios and things like that? Or is it the same across the board, whether you got an old bike or a new bike? Do you think what are some mistakes that maybe people make, or decisions they make on their premix?
Well, in today's market, in today's world, you can't really go by the bike manufacturer recommended ratio.
Either for new or for old, or across the board?
Well, for the old vintage bikes.
Okay.
For instance, because the oil has changed so much over the years that it's like night and day between the oil of yesterday and today. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the I would safely say, and I do this all the time in my bikes, 50-to-1 ratio with Amsoil Dominator oil, you'll be perfectly safe.
50-to-1.
50-to-1. Yep.
Okay. So in some cases I've read in the past where they say, well, you only need half the oil that the manufacturer recommends. So if it's 36-to-1, you can go 72-to-1. But you're saying no, 50-to-1.
Well, you really have to do your homework on that, Joe, because you have to dial it in with your carburetor, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Across the board, it depends on your riding style too. That's a hard question to ask because it's hard to go across the board in every scenario.
Right. But you're saying 50-to-1 is safe at this point for Amsoil in your older two-stroke bikes.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. And you know what, Russell, while I have you here, and I know you have a good background with oil, which has to lead into gasoline and octane things, and we're only going to talk so much about that. But what are you mixing as far as gasoline goes on your vintage bikes with your Amsoil?
Well, of course, don't ever use anything that has ethanol in it.
Mm-hmm.
Get a ethanol-free gasoline.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in California, what do you got? Can you get some at 91 octane?
In some places, yes.
Yeah. So here, I can get it at 93 octane, which is a little bit better than what you can out there. I mix it with my oil, but I also use octane boost too, which brings the flash point up higher.
Mm-hmm. So you would recommend Amsoil octane booster for guys that can't get pump gas over 91?
Yes, I would.
All right. Now, what about transmissions in the old two strokes? I have always, before Amsoil, before I started to look into, Amsoil products and I started using them, what I would do is I would go, because this is what the manufacturer represented, and that's what I used back when I did it, was a non-detergent oil. Changed it after every race, but I just went and bought a non-detergent oil because it didn't foam up and the bike seemed to shift better. What Amsoil product are you recommending for transmissions on the older bikes?
Well, Amsoil makes a transmission oil for bikes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if you checked out our website, but we have different oils just for that scenario. There's a transmission oil. There's also a gear oil. It's called Dirt. It comes in different viscosity too.
Okay.
A 30 weight, a 40 weight, and a 50 weight.
Now, so many guys run four strokes today too. Even a lot of vintage guys have four strokes. Do you make a different oil for the four stroke and the two stroke?
Yes, there's an oil for two stroke and four stroke. Yes.
So then tell me this, Russell. What would the difference in those two oils be? Because as I just said, here I am, and I'm sure there's a lot of other people out there too. They buy some non-detergent oil, whether it's a two stroke or a four stroke, they dump it in there, they go about their business, they change it. What's the difference between a two stroke and a four stroke as far as gear oil or transmission oil goes?
Well, it's formulated differently because of the different revs and the different strains on the engine itself. Mm-hmm. There's a different formula for each oil, and I can get that later on. I can answer some more questions about that. As far as like ATV oil, V-twin oil, motocross oil, marine oil, they're all formulated differently for different scenarios.
Right. Okay. So Amsoil. All right, I'm not gonna go there just yet because this is a question I have. No, I have something for a little bit later on. I don't want to get ahead of myself and start taking things too much out of order. So let me say this or ask you about this. Amsoil has been very involved in all types of motorsport racing. Tell me about some of the different racing races that Amsoil supports and the success of their racers. I mean, you guys are involved in snowmobile, dirt track, stock cars. Where does it begin? Where does it end? And tell me where you guys are with that.
Well, hopefully there's no end to it because we're a sponsor of the GNCC, the off-road racing series.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been doing that since 1975. We also sponsor the snowcross every year, American Rally, kart racing. We do a lot of boat sponsoring too. Fishing tournaments, that sort of thing. We have a great marine oil and marine grease. If you're not familiar with it, Amsoil makes Briggs and Stratton engine oil. I'm not sure if you guys know that or not, but Amsoil makes all the oil for Briggs and Stratton.
Okay.
So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, because their engines are part of so many different pieces of power equipment.
Yeah, and a lot of their power equipment is not only go-kart racing, of course, but they also do, generators, which kind of just sit there and just get hotter and hotter and hotter, and the oil breaks down, but Amsoil doesn't. That's why Briggs and Stratton actually went to Amsoil to formulate an oil just for their engines. They do all kinds of engines. Briggs and Stratton does. It's pretty amazing little company that has.
Mm-hmm. No, they've been around a long time, and that's a very popular name when it comes to small engines.
Yeah, so the Briggs and Stratton 4T oil is made by Amsoil.
I've been using Amsoil products in my shop now, Russell, since you became a sponsor of the show. Certainly over a year. I use a lot of the brake clean, and one of my favorites is metal protector. Like a lot of guys used WD-40 before I discovered metal protectant. What's the difference between WD-40 and the Amsoil metal protector?
Well, Amsoil, what we call MP, metal protector,
mm-hmm.
It's a substitute for the petroleum-based WD spray. And I guess everybody knows what WD-40 stands for. It's water displacement.
Yes.
But Amsoil MP also displaces water, just as WD-40 does. But it's synthetic. It's not a petroleum based like WD-40 is.
I think WD-40 has like kerosene in it.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. It has some water properties to it as well. I mean, it does a fine job. It's been around a long time, but Amsoil is synthetic and it lasts longer. It requires fewer applications.
I notice it does last longer when I
yes.
wipe things down or whatever I use it for. Where I previously used WD-40, the metal protectant does last a lot longer and it does a better job. Now we were talking a moment ago about different oils for 2 strokes and 4 strokes. Amsoil makes so many different oils for motorcycle engines, and you've got oils for V-twins. You've got oil for metric bikes. You've got oil for dirt bikes. What can you give us a short explanation of what's the difference between a V-twin oil and a metric bike oil?
Wow, now that's a great question, Joe.
Well,
but it's a complicated one too.
Well, if we can, let's talk about that.
But most people that ask that question usually have an underlying question that they really mean to ask. And
I don't.
Can I use the same motor oil in my motorcycle, in my dirt bike, and my ATV?
Right.
And the answer is no. On the surface, it sounds like you can, but you really can't. Only because every engine of that type is doing a different job, and they all have unique challenges to each one of those motors. And I can break them down for you. That's if you want me to, like whether it's a Harley Davidson, a Kawasaki sport bike, or a UTV dirt bike. I mean, the oil has to protect against wear and fight damaging effects of extreme heat. A V-twin has extreme heat. I mean, real extreme heat.
Mm-hmm.
Now the metric bikes have even more. So you take a V-twin, for instance, like a Harley Davidson or an Indian, those engines do get hot. And we've done dyno tests on those. And the cylinder gets about 420 degrees, and it wreaks havoc on an engine with that kind of heat. So you have to have an oil that can stand up to heat, because oil loses viscosity and it thins out, turning say a 20W50 into a 10W40 or worse. So a lighter viscosity in that engine is making the parts fail. Is what it's going to do.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does make sense. Now, what exactly is metric bike oil? When I think metric bike, I think of Asian bikes, Japanese bikes, Yamaha, Kawasaki, Suzuki. Is that what you're referring your metric bike oil to?
Yeah, that's about right. And they usually get up to about 10,000 RPM. So their crankshaft is spinning, really fast, and they whip air into the oil, and it causes foaming in the oil, which you kind of alluded to that earlier in one of your comments.
Yes.
When you have air that releases in the oil, it releases properties and bubbles, and it travels throughout the engine, and then they collapse, and it meshes the gears surfaces against themselves. Does that answer that for you?
Yeah, it does.
So wherever there's air, that means there's no protection. There's no oil where that air bubble was. So when you use Amsoil, they've formulated Amsoil synthetic metric oil to resist foaming. It won't foam in the engine at all. So it eliminates it altogether, really. You look at the engine. If you do a cutaway on it, you don't see any foaming in there at all.
Got you.
So the ATV oil is a totally different animal. I mean, it works, ATV works hard. In fact, I have a Honda Rancher myself here because I cut a lot of wood. I live up in the mountains, if everybody doesn't know that. I live in the mountains of North Carolina, high up on a mountain. So I use a lot of firewood because I heat my house with wood. I have a wood stove.
Okay.
It works very well. I mean, I have other heating, but I like the wood stove because it heats the house very well. But I use my ATV to cut wood out in the woods and haul a trailer, and it hauls a lot of wood. So it never hardly gets out of first gear, so it puts a lot of strain on the gears. So you really need an oil just engineered for that, and we at Amsoil have an oil just for ATVs and UTVs.
Now you talked a little bit earlier about viscosity and breakdown, and how oils react to heat, and of course being under strain, and there's a lot going on there. There was a test that was run where Amsoil came out on top. I think it was in 2019 or 2020.
Right.
I'd like the listeners to know more about what that test was like and why Amsoil came out on top. What kind of tests did they put Amsoil through, and who was your competition there? Was it Pennzoil?
Well, at the end it was Pennzoil, but every oil that's made today competed in the contest, whether it was Red Lime, Motul, you name it, Pennzoil, Quaker State, Castor Oil. Everybody was in the competition, and it was like an elimination. So every oil had to go against each other, and it moved up to like a pyramid, and finally it got to the end where Pennzoil and Amsoil faced off, and there was a lot of tests. I mean, it was a viscosity test, a burn-off test, a cold pour point test, which Amsoil, if people don't know this, and I'll let you in on a secret on Amsoil.
Sure.
Amsoil won't freeze till minus 60 degrees below zero. So when you're doing a cold pour test, Amsoil always wins that contest because whether it's used oil or brand new oil, the oil will still come out of the tube when it's at that temperature. So if anybody's trying to compete against it, it just won't happen. But to make that point even more, if you're like up north in Canada or Montana or Utah or Washington State, Alaska, when you turn the key on your ignition, the worst part of your engine is when you cold start, when there's no oil on the gears. So that there comes to a point where the conventional oil will freeze, even if you have a 20W50 or whatever in your engine. It's got a wax paraffin in it. Conventional oil does. It will harden and thicken, and that's not very good for the oil. That's why you see a lot of diesel trucks, they plug them in, keep the engine and the oil
warm.
Yeah. So it helps with all that scenarios. With Amsoil, you don't have to worry about that.
So it's good for minus 60.
Minus 60 degrees plus.
All right. I've got a question.
Amazing.
I got a question that came in from Achilles Caracas. I'd like to ask you about it, Russell. And it was something he kind of touched on a moment ago. It says, Joe, I would like to know how ethanol in our gas affects two-stroke oil. More specifically, does ethanol react to the synthetic and other castor oils? You told us to stay away from the ethanol. We all get that because so many people are running liners in gas tanks and fiberglass tanks. But how does that ethanol gas really change the profile of the oil, or how do they react to each other?
Well, they don't mix very well. The ethanol it has a different flash point than the regular fuel itself. That's why non-ethanol fuel actually ignites at the lower temperature, which makes the spark in the cylinder spark earlier. But it also has an effect on your internal carburation issues. I mean, a lot of floats are made out of plastic now. So what happens is the ethanol makes the plastic expand, whether it's, and in fact, I've seen some carburetors that have the needles made out of plastic, which is kind of crazy, but they used to be made out of brass. But, most floats used to be made out of brass. But now a lot of them are switching to plastic, which ethanol really affects plastic big time, especially on small engines, whether it's chainsaws or a weed eater. I mean, I can tell you, my neighbor was using ethanol in his. He couldn't even get his gas cap off his where you put the gas in.
Really?
It expanded the gas cap so much.
Huh. So you're just telling people to stay away from ethanol gas across the board, whether it's with a motorcycle, a chainsaw, a lawnmower, whatever it might be?
Yes, for sure. Yes.
Okay.
Not recommended. Not recommended at all.
Will different oils, let's say a cheaper oil, will it have an effect on seals of an engine, Russell?
Yeah, it will. The cheaper oils don't really have the additives in it to maintain some of the seals. I won't be specific on any one particular brand, which I know some of, but yes, they do cause engine leaks. But Amsoil's got a formula in there to help prevent that. It won't leak after you use or switch to Amsoil synthetic oil.
Okay, so if a person's running conventional oil for, I don't know, they got a car, they're running it for 60,000 miles, and one day, a light goes off in their head, they want to run synthetic. That's just it.
Yeah.
They just drain the engine, replace it with synthetic, and that's the end of the story.
Well, you can. Amsoil makes a flush too. You can put an engine flush in there. I think it's $9. You put that in with the engine, let it run for 10 minutes, and then drain it all out, and it'll actually flush all the old oil out of the engine.
Okay. I also saw something where Amsoil states that their signature series oil is good for 25,000 miles.
I know it sounds crazy.
So
you're
telling are you just talking about like a regular guy with a Ford F-150 or a Chevy Avalanche or a Dodge Ram, whatever he's got? He's been changing the oil in a gas engine every 3,000 miles. You're telling me this guy can go what, a year without changing his oil?
The average person puts about 13,000 miles on a car, so yeah, you could go over a year without changing your oil. Yes.
Do you guys make filters too? Because that's got to be a big part of the equation.
Yeah, no, that's the biggest part of the equation, like you said, Joe. So Amsoil makes the best filter that's out there on the market today. If you ever take one apart, you'll kind of see the difference. The exterior is made out of stainless steel if it's a spin-on filter, which is a big difference from anybody else. Most people make them out of steel, but Amsoil makes theirs out of stainless steel. For one, because it's on the vehicle longer.
Yeah.
But the internal mesh is not paper like most filters. It's a monofilament. It's almost like a plastic strainer. So an average, let's just say a coffee filter is 20 microns, which it is. Most coffee filters are 20 microns. An Amsoil filter is 20 microns. But the difference is the efficiency. A coffee filter is about 80% efficient by keeping the grounds out of the coffee.
Yeah.
An Amsoil filter is 99.7% efficient, which means hardly any particles go through the filter whatsoever. So it keeps your oil cleaner longer.
Okay. Now, how can I say this? Because it really isn't in my list of questions here, but whether it's a Jiffy Lube, an Oil Can Henry, a Valvoline, where people go get their oil changed, I mean, is there a place that uses Amsoil? Are there places throughout the country, or is Amsoil one of those things where I've got to buy it myself and change it myself, or go to a local mechanic to have it put in my car?
Well, around here, I actually supply some oil change places here. Snappy Lube has Amsoil available for customers. They usually have a good, better, best, and then Amsoil is the outstanding oil change. They have different parameters of their oil changes.
Mm-hmm.
And the cheap stuff is probably a $30 oil change, and you might get a Service Champ oil filter spin on, which is probably about 35 microns. I mean, it's pretty low microns, like a Fram filter or whatever. Some of those filters aren't as good as an Amsoil filter for sure.
Okay.
I mean, there's some good filters out there. Royal Filter makes a good filter. I could name several other filters that are good, but Amsoil is probably the best one on the market. Well, not probably, it is the best one on the market.
Got you. Let's get back to some motorcycle lubricant questions, Russell.
Okay.
I mean, you have different kinds of bikes, different types of conditions, and where guys race and they ride. Grease. Is there a viscosity to grease like there is with oil? And what about waterproof grease? What exactly makes it waterproof?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of different greases. Yeah. So grease has a viscosity, just like oil does, and there's 9 different ones, and it's all set up as a baseline, kind of like oil is set up with 0W20, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Grease also has the same type of measurement. There's a 000, a 00, a single 0, and then a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's all established by the National Lubrication and Grease Institute. So a 000 grease is nearly fluid. It's not, it's not runny like oil, but it's pretty loosey goosey.
Like a syrup would be, maybe like a maple syrup.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
So a number 6 grease is almost a solid grease. It's pretty thick. I guess I could tell you. I guess it's probably better to relate them to certain kind of products. Maybe that would help people understand it. So a number 2 grease is like a 5th wheel grease. I mean, number 2 is probably the most popular grease for penetration and consistency, that sort of thing. We also there's a food grade grease too. A lot of people don't know that too. There's grease that's made to use around food products.
Oh, like in a deli for their meat saws and stuff like that?
Yeah. Something like that, yeah. So like a 0 grease is more like an applesauce, and a 0 grease is kind of like a brown mustard texture to it. A 1 is like a tomato base. It's a little bit thicker.
Mm-hmm.
And normal grease, like a number 2, is like a peanut butter. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I think it makes sense.
Number 3 is like a vegetable shortening, and then it gets like number 4 is like a yogurt. Number 5 is, or number 6 is like a cheddar cheese.
I got you. Well, no, that's a good way to explain it, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about grease in just a second. But I got a question before that, and I want to know what makes waterproof grease waterproof. What is the difference between that? What makes it waterproof?
Okay. Well, every grease is somewhat waterproof. If you pour water on grease, it's going to roll off.
Yeah.
But what waterproof grease does is more made for marine grease or even some motorcycle greases. They encapsulate water molecules and it forms a paste like a cream cheese. So it keeps it from getting mixed in with the grease.
Okay. And and so then it does that, and then it keeps that water. It keeps it away from the bearing itself somehow?
Yeah. It collects it like in large globs, and it runs out there rather than being encapsulated inside the grease.
Okay.
So it prevents the scouring and galling of a bearing or something like that.
While we're talking about grease, Russell, I want to talk about this too. Let's discuss how grease actually needs to heat up to really do its job, and what some people should consider before choosing the next grease. Because, like you mentioned, 5th wheel grease before looks like tar. It's just this big gloppy, disgusting grease sitting on the back of a 5th wheel. And when people think about grease, they think about, well, you know what? The thicker it is, the better it's got to be. Now, that's not necessarily so if you want to have grease in a wheel bearing, because the grease of a wheel bearing in a motorcycle trailer certainly isn't going to be the grease that you put in a 40-foot long trailer.
Right, exactly.
So how does that all break down?
Well, Amsoil grease is synthetic, so that makes a big difference right there. It's not a petroleum-based grease. So as it heats up, it does get thicker, and conventional grease does get thicker too.
It gets thicker as it heats up, or it gets thinner?
Well, I mean thinner as it heats up. It gets a little bit thinner.
Okay.
But synthetic grease really doesn't break down like conventional grease does, and it's kind of hard to differentiate. But when you look at conventional grease, it will get thinner, whereas synthetic won't break down. So it kind of remains the same as when you put it on the wheel bearing.
Got
So
you.
it's kind of like a service life of the grease.
So what viscosity grease is a guy putting in his little motorcycle or jet ski trailer? What's the viscosity of that grease as opposed to a guy who's hauling a bulldozer on the back of a flatbed trailer? What are the differences?
Well, you want a thicker grease on the flatbed truck, so you'd go from a number 2 to probably a number 6 on a flatbed truck as far as thickness.
Got you. Now I got another question here, and I don't know who it's from, but he is a Facebook user. It says, if an oil filter is more efficient, wouldn't it clog quicker and restrict flow? I'm assuming there would be less wear with synthetic, so it wouldn't be a problem, but I'm not sure. What do you think of that question, Russell?
Well,
Was that?
Yeah, with synthetic, he's right. Synthetics would cause less wear, so you wouldn't have as many particles in your engine, which is very important. But all oil filters have a bypass on them, so if it gets clogged up, it'll bypass the filter and go through your engine, allowing the oil to completely go through the engine. But that's kind of dangerous because once you bypass the filtration,
there's no filter, right?
Particles throughout the engine. So, like if you have a Toyota engine and they're notoriously known for, they're made out of all aluminum head, aluminum base, so the aluminum's going to break down faster. So you really want a filter that can capture all that. And they recommend 15,000-mile filter on a Toyota, only because, like your caller just asked, once the filter gets clogged up with those particles from the aluminum, it's going to go to the bypass, which is going to cause you problems.
Okay. Now, Russell, I've often wondered this, and you know, with the vintage scene and so many people pulling out memorabilia and different things, sometimes people pull out old cases of oil, brand new oil in a case. Now, if someone found a case of old motor oil, brand new, can they use that? I mean, what does something happen to oil as it just sits in a bottle?
Yes.
It'll
start. There's a sediment point at the oil, and all the sediment will start going to the bottom of the bottle. I've actually taken some off a shelf at Walmart where you can kind of see through the bottle. I mean, the company made this clear bottle so you can see how great their oil was, but it sat there for probably a couple of years, and I could see the sediment in the bottom of it. My recommendation on something like that would just be use it for door hinges or something like that, because you wouldn't want to put that in an engine at all with the sediments in there. It'll clog up your oil filter for sure.
Okay, so let's stay away from it. And you know what, Russell, while I'm thinking about it, what about if somebody found, I mean, everybody used to love, what was it, Klotz bean oil. There were some other ones back in the day. If somebody found a can of that, would you recommend they pass on putting it in their premix, or is it something they could still use?
I'd pass on it.
Yeah?
Yeah, I would.
Okay.
It's going to have sediment in it for sure. Whether it's bean oil or conventional oil, it's going to have some sediment in the bottom of that can or bottle.
Let's, we were just talking about power equipment too. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners have lawnmowers, chainsaws, and things like that. So how can they benefit from using Amsoil lubricants in those tools?
Well, a two-stroke, we make a Sabre oil, which is, I know this is hard to believe, but it's 100-to-1 ratio recommended for those power tools, whether it's a weed eater, a blower, chainsaw. 100-to-1, it'll give you more power. I know most chainsaws say 50-to-1 or even a 32-to-1, but Amsoil has an oil you can use at a 100-to-1 ratio called Sabre.
100-to-1.
100-to-1.
And that would be good in a chainsaw, weed whacker, anything like that.
Yes, sir. Yep.
Well, okay, go on. If you had something more to talk about there, I'd like to know more about that too.
Well, it gives you more power. I mean, I use a chainsaw all the time. I can definitely tell the difference when I use Sabre oil in my chainsaw, and I actually sell a lot of it to lawn care guys, and they love it because they're using less oil for one, and they're getting more power, and the longevity of the pistons is a lot longer.
Russell, you know what? I'm going to shoot from the hip on this one question because your questions and what you've been saying or your answers kind of prompted it. Do you have in your of your customer base, do you have someone that maybe has 15, 20, 30 trucks that they
Yes.
were running conventional oil, switched over to Amsoil, and saw the differences? Do you have a fleet that converted, and what were the results? What was the bottom line with something like that?
Oh my gosh, yeah, I have a truck line, a trucking company that has about 460 trucks
Whoa.
go over the road, semi trucks.
Mhm.
They switched to Amsoil slowly, so I had to kind of show them. And they bought bypass filters. A lot of people don't know what a bypass filter is, but you have a conventional filter on a semi truck. You can also install a bypass filter, which actually runs the oil through another filtration system and gives it a 99.9% filtration. They are actually getting, and I know it's hard to believe, 300,000 miles out of Amsoil. We've actually, in fact, I talked to the owner 2 weeks ago. We sent the oil off for analyzation to the test site.
Mm-hmm.
They sent it back and said, all you need to do is change your filter. So that's pretty impressive.
And when they process that oil, they find what in there? They're looking for metal particles. They're looking for stuff like that.
Yeah, medical particles, or if the oil is broken down at all, but it didn't break down at all.
Yeah. Now, in those hot engines, Russell, diesels especially, things that are running for 8, 10, 12 hours at a time, what about evaporation? Is that something to be concerned with too? And how does Amsoil stack up against? I don't think it's called evaporation with oil, but it's called something else.
Yeah. If you ever look on the internet and see the test that was done, the burn off of oil, conventional oil versus synthetic oil, Amsoil is like 38% less burn off than any other oil that was tested against. So it really does not burn off in the engine at high heat intervals. But like I said earlier about oils, there's different oils for different, like the V-twin and the 10,000 RPM metric bikes, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's different oils that resist burn off.
So people should really do a lot more investigating and reading about oil, I think, before purchasing it. Yeah, we know a lot more about Amsoil this morning after speaking with you, but I think a lot more research should go into looking at oils and looking at these tests that have been done. Because as I asked you, you're like, why is a guy with a V twin running this oil and a guy with a BMW horizontal motor or whatever it's called? Why is he running something different? But
yeah. Well, like Indian Motorcycle, they recommend Amsoil now coming out the gate. I mean, if you look in their service manual, that's what they recommend is Amsoil.
Okay. You know what I was interested in too, Russell, is you guys make something for firearms. You make a good lubricant for firearms. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Oh yeah. We got a new firearm lubricant and a cleaning. It comes in either a bottle or spray form, and it's also synthetic. And I sell a lot of that to gun shops that have shooting ranges. And I can tell you for a fact, and I know this personally because one of the guys was kind of skeptical about. He uses a lot of Winchester oil, which is conventional oil. Mm-hmm. It breaks down, and a gun is just like an engine in a way. There's high heat when the bullet goes off. There's high heat in the chamber, and it will burn off the oil. And Amsoil resists that. The slide comes back easier. There's less gunpowder residue. I mean, he's taken the identical weapons, identical rounds in it, but used Amsoil lubricant on it and cleaner versus a Winchester oil, say, and the slide comes back smoother, and there is less gunpowder residue stuck to the oil.
Got you. Hey, Russell, I didn't even think about this. Where exactly is the main headquarters for Amsoil? Where's the oil actually manufactured? Stuff like that.
Well, it's in Superior, Wisconsin, and Amsoil is made in a laboratory. That's what's different. It's not made in a facility like most oils are. It's made in a laboratory. Superior, Wisconsin, in the good old USA.
Got you. So when you say it's manufactured, there is what kind of oil gets shipped to Wisconsin, and what happens to it? Where does that oil come from? I mean, is
Well,
it
there's a base oil, and it's a proprietary information, but
okay?
they won't really tell anybody the base oil and the ingredients because it's proprietary. I mean, if they let everybody know, they'd be copying it. But Amsoil years ago, Mr. Amatuzio, which started Amsoil years ago. He used to be. I'm not sure we didn't talk about this, but he used to be a jet pilot in the Air Force, and he just realized that jets were using synthetic oil because of the extreme temperatures and cold. He thought, well, why can't you use this in cars? It would be so much better in a car. So he came out with it back in the '60s, late '60s, and he actually approached Mobil and Chevron and Shell, and everybody turned him down. Said, no, that's unheard of. That's kind of crazy stuff right there. Because back then, oil was 50 cents a quart, and Amsoil was $5 a quart. Big difference.
Wow.
Back in the day. But now it's narrow now. I mean, there's not much difference between conventional oil and synthetic oil, really.
Okay.
At
So
the retail price.
So he decides he's going to make this oil, and that's where he got started in Wisconsin.
Yes.
And
Sure
I know you say it's proprietary; you can't give out too much information. But what happens? Does a 50-gallon drum of crude oil get there, and then you take it from there? No, seriously. I mean,
well, it comes by the trainload.
Well, by the train load. Okay.
Yeah, but it comes by the train load. There's actually a train track. I've actually been to the plant, so there's a train track that runs through the plant and then goes to the laboratory, and it's put into big containers, and then it's constructed.
Okay.
Let's put it that way. It's constructed.
All right. I got another Facebook user here says, what would you recommend as far as an Amsoil product for motorcycle cable lube? I've often used Triflow. Just curious. What do you recommend for his cables, Russell?
Yeah, that's a good question. You could. There is a funnel system that you can put on the cable system, and I've done this too with a zip tie. And I've actually just used real lightweight synthetic oil and let it go down through the cable until it comes out the other end, and then I know it's lubricated.
Right.
But there's a lot of products out there you could use other than Amsoil, but
no. I'm just talking about Amsoil products. I'm not looking for your recommendation on. This guy says he used Triflow. I remember what Triflow was like when I was a kid. We raced BMX. It smelled great like bananas or something. I forgot what it was like. But
it's good stuff.
Yeah,
it's good stuff. I would just use Amsoil. I mean, I just let it flow down through the cable system.
So just
back and forth.
Okay. I think I had another question from. No, I guess I didn't. And we talked about the firearm stuff. And are there Amsoil distributors abroad, Russell, or is it just in the USA?
Oh, no. There's about 72 countries that have Amsoil distributors throughout the world.
How many countries?
What's that?
How many countries have it?
About 70, 72.
Okay.
There's a bunch of them out there.
All right. So 72.
There's some in Japan and, Hong Kong, Thailand, in the Middle East, Europe, Spain, Italy. They're out there.
Right. And there must be a, there seems to be somebody watching everybody these days. So I think we did talk about it one time to where there was, I forget what you call it. There was a group of people doing tests throughout the world to make sure that your oil and everybody else's meets the qualification.
Right.
So it has to be tested because they want to know the same oil in whether it's Japan or Spain or whatever it is. There's some heavy scrutiny over how this oil is made.
Yes, that's true. There is. Yes.
Okay. Well, Russell, we're just about out of time for today. I wanted to thank you for being my guest. And if there's, I know what I wanted to ask you too. Is there any new products we should be looking for from Amsoil? Is there anything coming up in the future? We've got electric bikes and electric engines coming into play now. They must have some lubrication in the bearings for those things too. So how does Amsoil plan on fitting into that market?
Well, we're working on some electric stuff right now, components and spray-ons and stuff. A battery cleaner, terminal cleaner, that sort of thing. We just came out with a brand new ATV oil for Polaris, so we got some for those. We got oil change kits that come with the oil, the filter, and the ring for those, just like we do for the V twins. We make those in for Indy and Harley Davidson. You can get a chrome filter or a satin black filter also in those. Those are kind of new. But they're coming out with all kinds of new stuff. The new Mudslinger that came out last year, but that's really hitting the market by storm. I'm sure some people have tried it. I think you've tried it too, Joe.
I have. I like it.
You spray that on the fenders or in your ATV, and the mud just comes right off when you wash it. So it's pretty amazing.
Yeah,
it's like a silicone base.
It is, and you guys, you have a great product as far as your chain lube and so many other things that I really enjoy using around the shop.
The chain lube is awesome. It doesn't sling off the chain. It's pretty amazing stuff too. I like that.
It is.
PJ1 used to have, I used to be big in chain lube stuff too, but Amsoil really surpasses that, in my opinion. I mean, I use it myself, so it works good. Why wouldn't I? I use all the Amsoil products.
Of course, of course.
Yeah.
Where could people see most of or all the products? I mean, you must have a website. Is it just amsoil.com, or where would they find most of the products?
You can go on. I have a website too. It's theoilpeople.shopamsoil.com.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can just go on the Amsoil website and look too. But yeah, you can order it online. You can become a preferred customer and get everything at 25% off. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can do it.
Yeah,
if you have a shop, you can become a retailer. If you're you can become a dealer. You can become a mechanic and use it and get paid to use Amsoil products. It's pretty amazing. There's a lot of different ways you can get involved in Amsoil these days.
And we have a special going on right now from Russell Waters and Amsoil. You'll see it on Vintage Motocross Q&A on Wednesday nights, where I think it's like a $75 retail value. It's for just 40. I think it's 46 or 47 bucks shipping included, and you get a nice array of products. And from that, Russell also makes you a preferred customer for up to a year with 25% off. So visit us at Vintage Motocross Q&A. There's a post there. You'll be able to see more about that. Is there anybody else you want to thank this morning, Russell? Or
yeah, I'd like to thank a couple of your customers already. We've already got 2 orders from Chris McCullum. He ordered one of those kits yesterday. And so did Phil Bafar. He ordered one. He lives in Kansas, and the other guy lives in Franklin, Tennessee. So it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, well, it's a great little deal. It's got the funnel that comes along with it, and Russell will also send you a surprise gift in the box. We're not going to tell you what that is, but you'll get more than you'll get more than you bargained for when you order that special from Amsoil. Right. Russell, I want to thank you again for taking the time to speak with us today.
No worries, Joe. I really appreciate talking to the people and sponsoring your show. You got a great show, and I actually learn stuff when I watch the show. So my hat's off to you. You're doing a great job, Joe. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Russell, and I will be in touch.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you, listeners.
All righty, Russell.
All right. Talk to you later.
Bye. My guest this morning has been Russell Waters from Amsoil. We had a lot to talk about, and so many different things that we learned about not only Amsoil products, but conventional oils as well. You can go online and visit amsoil.com, and you'll see a whole lot more about what's going on in the oil world and how many different ways you can use Amsoil products. I want to thank our sponsors for making this show possible this morning. Northwest Mako CZ. For all your Mako and CZ parts, please contact Alan Brown. Preston Petty Products. The legend continues. Thank you, Paul and Patty Stannard, for your years of support here at Vintage Motocross Radio and Vintage Motocross Q&A. Of course, Amsoil. Just had a lengthy conversation with Russell Waters. They are the first in synthetic oil since 1972. Full Circle Racing for rim, spokes, lacing, and truing. Be sure to see Tom McAllister at Full Circle Racing Limited. Vinco. Keep the ride going with over 650 products in their catalog. And if you want to know more about Vinco, Curtis Leverton was my guest a few weeks ago. You could go into the archives of the Vintage Motocross Radio page, and you can listen to the interview with Curtis Leverton and, of course, Paul Stannard. Now that I'm thinking about it, we did an interview with Paul a while back. Our new sponsor, Sunrise Vapor Blasting. Thank you, Mark Farrister. Visit them on their Facebook page, Sunrise Vapor Blasting. We'll be showing a lot more of what they're doing here in Northern California on Vintage Motocross Q&A. We'll have some videos coming up of what Mark does, how the beautiful job they're doing there at Sunrise Vapor Blasting on carburetors and all sorts of aluminum parts. So I want to thank you all for listening today to Vintage Motocross Radio. Again, our condolences to the Bent Aberg family. I think passed on yesterday at 76 years old. And while I'm thinking about it right now, I'd like also to Send my best wishes and thoughts and prayers to Lynn Hildebrand, Ashlyn Hildebrand. Our good friend Mark is in the hospital. He is battling COVID. It's quite serious. He is making some progress from just a few days ago. But Mark Hildebrand, as you know, the owner of Nightmare Racing, or your Kawasaki Plastic, a former sponsor, and just a wonderful friend of mine for many, many years. Our thoughts and prayers go out to the Hildebrand family. Mark is fighting a great fight. For all of you that listen today, I want to thank you. Please join me on Vintage Motocross Q&A on Wednesday night at 6. Please enjoy the rest of your day. This is Joe Abadi. Bye for now.